Hello, fam. I was just checking to see if he was paying attention and watching. This is our video solutions for quiz 8. I'm going to go over the quiz problems. I am going to show you my flashcards that I think would be helpful to study for this quiz if you need to retake it, and then I will give you your code that you need to retake it if you would like to do that. So, before we get into the problems, let me just remind you of the flashcards that I made for Unit 2. I think that these flashcards will help a ton in preparing you for a Quiz 8 retake, and please keep in mind that I made the Quiz 8 retake, so I know what's going to be on it. I'm only showing you things that I think will help you. So I only have 8 flashcards that I think could be very helpful in prepping you for Quiz 8. So I actually don't want to start with that one. The first one that I want to start with is facts about standard deviation. Facts about standard deviation. So some of the biggest takeaways from this flashcard are that your standard deviation is always greater than 0, because if your standard deviation is 0, that means that all of your data values are the same. So if you get a standard deviation of 0, that means that all of your data values are exactly the same. The other thing that is very helpful to know is that standard deviation measures spread, and it can also sometimes be referred to as variance. But I think that the biggest takeaways are that it's bigger than 0, because if it's 0, that means your data values are all the same, and that standard deviation measures spread. It's how clustered or spread out are the data values from the mean. Then I have interpreting standard deviation. The biggest thing to make sure that you know on this flashcard is typically varies. Don't use any other phrasing. Don't use the word tends. The data tends to vary by. Just memorize the phrase typically varies. And then the third flashcard, which is going to lead me into the first exam problem that I would like to talk about, is standard deviation versus deviation. So standard deviation tells you the typical distance from the mean for all data values. Deviation is specific to one data value. That is going to help us determine what happens to our mean and our standard deviation if we add a value. So we need to look at the new value in relation to the mean, and we need to look at the new value in relation to the standard deviation. So that's where we start at on this quiz. I'm starting with number 2. You will have this on your retake. You will have it on your comprehensive exam that goes with Unit 3, so we're not ever going to get away from this. We have a test scores, test scores with a mean of 81 and a standard deviation of 9. And we want to add a score of 65. Add x is 65. Okay, so let's look at the mean first. Our current mean is 81, and this new point is below that. So our mean is going to decrease. Our mean is going to decrease. We are adding a value that is less than the mean. So that eliminates A and B. Now we need to compare standard deviation to the deviation of this data value. The deviation is 65 minus 81. Deviation is, sorry, I'm just pulling up my flashcard. The given observation, subtract the mean. So I get a deviation for this point of negative 16. This negative is just telling us that it's below the mean. So my standard deviation is 9 away from the mean. It can be 9 above or 9 below. The deviation of this particular point is 16 below. That means that our standard deviation will increase. Our standard deviation will increase because this is farther away from the mean than the standard. The standard is 9, this observation is 16. So your standard deviation will increase. The negative on this value just indicates that this is below the mean. It's not telling you the value of the number, it's telling you the direction that this observation is in. I would make sure that you know what happens if the standard or if the deviation is 0, what happens if the deviation is bigger, what happens if the deviation is smaller. So I would make sure that you know what happens if you add a value and the standard deviation is 0, the standard deviation is larger. I shouldn't say standard deviation. The deviation is 0, the deviation is smaller. So let me just write that on here. What if deviation were 0? What if deviation were 4? If this deviation would have been 4, your standard deviation would decrease because this is less than the standard. If your deviation was 0, it would decrease because this is less than the standard. Increase more than the standard. What if it is the standard deviation? Then it stays the same. So make sure you know what happens if deviation is 0, deviation is greater, deviation is less, deviation is the same. If this is confusing you, email me, Zoom, come see me, get this figured out before you do your retake. Okay, next one that I wanted to look at is our descriptive statistics. So I have a flashcard for this, finding X using Z. That's what we're about to do. And on the back side, I just walk through all of the steps that I would take to solve this problem. So if this is the case, I'm just going to move this to the side. This says I will be given Z. I am. It's negative 1.2. My flashcard says I'm finding X, I'm given X bar, and I'm given standard deviation. Okay, standard deviation is 221.9, that's right here. X bar is 1045.7. Okay, so now I do right here on my flashcard, Z equals X minus the mean divided by the standard deviation. Okay, it says multiply both sides by S sub X, so multiply both sides by 221.9. That gives us negative 26628. Then it says add x bar to both sides. So add 2045.7. That gives me 779.42 equals x. So B as in boy. Okay, your access code for this retake is ACORN, all capitalized. Your access code for quiz 8 retake is ACORN, all caps. Quiz 8, ACORN. Okay, I'm going to quickly go through our other problems. Number 4 wants to know if this student did better in chemistry or calculus. Most of you guys did fine on this problem. Really the only errors that I saw were that you must have plugged it into your calculator wrong. Like your formula that I'm about to fill out was right, but the answer that you had was not correct. So we want to find his standardized score for chemistry and compare it to his standardized score for calculus. So for chemistry, it is 75 and 12. So minus 75 divided by 12. For calculus, it is minus 84 divided by, just kidding, minus 80 divided by 8. So now I just need to know his score on these exams. So, or I guess it could have been a girl. They got an 81 on chemistry and an 84 on calc. Okay. So this gives me 6 out of 12. This gives me 4 out of 8. I get a z-score of 0.5 for both of these students. So the answer is CAT. The student did equally well in each course. In each course, he was half a standard deviation above the mean. Number 3 is an interpretation of z-score. So I do have a flashcard for that. The biggest thing that you want to make sure that you include is the word above or below. You don't want to leave that off. So a z-score of 1.5 is 1.5 standard deviations above the mean, so that's what I'm looking for. A is a no. B, 1.5 standard deviations above the average, so it can be B. Gina's blood pressure is 1.5 above. No, it's not 1.5 above, it's 1.5 standard deviations. Gina's blood pressure is 1.5 times. Nope. Only 1.5% of women, nope. So it is B. It does have to be B. And then lastly, we have interpreting standard deviation. So I want to look for any response that uses the words or word typically varies. The number of haircuts is always within 2 haircuts. No, always. That's an issue. The gap between the smallest and largest number of haircuts is 2. No, that would be range. The number of haircuts is always 2 haircuts. No, always is a bad word to be using. The gap between the first and third, that's IQR. So it has to be E by deduction. Let's just verify. The number of haircuts is typically, ding, 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 2 haircuts from the mean of 13 haircuts. So that is our solutions for quiz 8. Retaking Quiz 8 would be a great way to review for your cumulative exam that you have coming up. Your passcode is ACORN. I would use your flashcards to study if you made them. If you didn't, maybe you want to make the ones that I showed you. I think that's it. Love you guys.